this would be a good time for me to text Josh and say, "Hey, buddy." I'm thinking we might wing it, and let's see. I have no notes, but certainly some things that I wanted to have brought up.
Well,
I
Blunty
did
mentioned
think,
he had a few topics he could talk about as well, so I'm sure we could
excellent,
still have a meeting.
excellent. Blunty, would you start?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. We talked a little bit. I mean, probably the first thing we could just officially talk about is the air map thing. I mean, we posted that in the general channel, but AirMap has stopped providing LANC service. So, they didn't seem. I don't know. I heard a couple of the places seemed to comment like it was a big provider of LANC. Are they like back end for anybody else, or is that just confusion in people's understanding of AirMap?
I think it might be confusion because I think by far Aloft is the largest provider, and they are the developer behind Before You Fly. So I
Right.
think John Hugranes and Aloft have done a superb job, and they continue to be free for recreational.
Gotcha. That's kind of my understanding as well. But yeah, I wasn't 100% sure. So it does, like we said before, it does look like they are considering going into UTM or some kind of BVLOS management, automation, tracking sort of thing. So I guess we'll end up seeing where AirMap ends up.
Yeah.
Another thing that's been kind of on the docket is, or at least I've seen going around, is the 118th Congress is introducing the Counting CCP Drones Act again. The County CCP Drones Act is the FCC ban of DJI. So that would put it on the covered list for the FCC. And people are worried because there's a line in there that would technically stop the FCC from being able to review DJI products in the future for FCC approval, or at least that's the understanding that I've seen. So I doubt that it'll make it all the way through with that in it, or at all maybe, but especially with that in it. But it is technically, I think, a possibility that that's one route they could do instead of like import bans to stop DJI from being usable in the U.S. So
Yeah, and I was reading up on this one as you exactly as you said, this bill was released by the same Congresswoman, Elsie Stefanik of New York, and it released into the 117th and just released into the 118th Congress a couple weeks ago. And so she has referred it over to the Energy and Commerce Committee, which of course is the correct committee because she's trying to go after grounding effectively DJI through the FCC guidance, just as you said. So if we think, oh, we should send letters and cards and letters to the aviation subcommittee, not on this one. And it's important if you look at GovTrack and what are the probability of this piece of legislation happening or not. It's still early days. This is going from a congressional representative to a committee. Now, Elise Stefanik is the third most powerful representative in the House. So she replaced Liz Cheney. So it is an important position. So we definitely should take this seriously. But there is only one co-sponsor, and we'll see how this progresses in committee to see if it ever gets to committee, because it did not in the 117th, and we'll see what happens. But yeah, this one is unnerving because it was stroke of a pen. It could halt current and future DJI operations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I guess we'll see as it goes on what GovTrack says about like where we're at with it and what we think will actually happen with it. I know they introduced this last year, but I think it was late in the session, if I'm not mistaken. So it wasn't necessarily there wasn't necessarily time for it. The only other thing I had was that I saw that the Australian FAA equivalent, which is the CASA, they were going to introduce a registration scheme for wrecked drones more than 250 grams. And that has stopped, and they've decided not to do that. So I thought that was kind of interesting. They didn't really put out information on why or what the process is, but it seems like at least currently they are pausing on forcing registration for those.
Yeah, I don't know if XJet's got any more inside information on why they decided not to go ahead with that, but not sure I saw a whole lot of details on that either.
Yeah. Yeah, that's about all I got.
We have a couple things coming up from the FAA. We have to get jumping on a beyond visual line of sight rules. The FAA is looking for comments, and one of the topics in their comments list is shielded operations. So our thanks to XJet for bringing that to our attention several years ago. We've brought it to the FAA's attention multiple times in drone advisory committee work back in 2021, as well as Dan and I brought it up and made it prominent in the Beyond Visual Line of Sight Aviation Rulemaking Committee. So it's a quick turnaround on that one. We have until June 14, so we will we'll put together an appropriate statement and get that up in public. The second document up for comments is due on July 31st of this year. That is the FAA's new policy for noise. This is important because if you think of environmental protection work, or what are we worried about with respect to regulations of aircraft, noise for crewed or manned aircraft is number one on the list, and it appears that it will be very high on the list for a small unmanned aircraft system as well. So we have an opportunity to comment on those two documents. We'll be on it, and there's that. We are also escalating a number of situations where we'd like the FAA to be a little more responsive to the at least the three CBOs, FTCA, STEM plus C, and us, FPVFC, and we're working it up the management chain in the FAA. Hopefully, we'll get some response from that. We've a good example of the challenges top of our list is the FRIA application process. Lots of denials popping up, and it appears that if you have an application in and it gets denied, that there's no dialogue of, well, that's not what I meant, or if I change this, can I get it approved? And so it's just denied, stamp. And it appears that we have to go and start the process over again. So those of us who have submitted applications, we submitted them in December. Here it is May. So we're going to start that clock again. So this is part of the process that we're escalating, that would really like to understand, is there a service level agreement that the FAA has on responding to FRIA applications? What's the process? We've asked for a rotation. We've asked for access to the application programming interface, and more. So that's ongoing. We're working on that. It's frustrating. So it's not a happy story yet, and there are a number of great situations, or great individuals who really need FRIA status, like around schools, that the teachers are teaching kids in STEM programs, and wouldn't it be nice if they could fly outside without remote ID in a controlled environment in whatever airspace is appropriate.
Yeah, so I just shared a screenshot of the rejection letter I got from the FAA today about my second FRIA request. And this one was for my property. And my justification for it was so that I could fly sub 250 gram drones in my backyard to do reviews for them for YouTube or things like that. And they just flat out rejected it, basically saying that it's within a residential area, and that without remote ID, it may negatively impact the safety and security of persons and property on the ground. So, put that remote ID module on that 200 gram drone and it will be way safer. And
I think
Dave's frozen.
I think XJet, I think we've talked about this quite a few times at this point, but yeah, as far as we know, they're not approving any personal FRIAs. That's something they said in that meeting we had with them a couple of months ago, that they will not approve a personal FRIA. It has to be a group place where people congregate, and is like a known flying spot for multiple people.
Yeah, and they pretty much reiterate that in my rejection letter, because it's a private residential property and not a community flying site. I mean, what if I had lots of friends over every week to fly in my backyard? Like, how is that not a community? Like, what's their definition of a community flying site anyway? Basically, is this an AMA flying field already? Yes, then we'll approve it as a FRIA. If not, sorry, it's not a community flying site.
Pretty much. I mean, it's unfortunate because, I mean, the hope would be that there was some kind of actual review going on and consideration for like what's happening in each of these locations and stuff, but it does seem to be fairly blanket bans based on stuff. And as we assumed, the FRIA process was broken and horrible, but it's clear that's the case now when we see denials and you have to go back through the entire process, likely get another person reviewing your application than the first person. Right? It's just like, it's so convoluted.
Yeah, and we've got no idea what order they're doing these in. I've gotten 2 rejections. One was one I submitted in December, and one was one I submitted in January. And Alex has some FRIA requests that he submitted before mine, and he has not received anything back yet. I believe one of those would be for Joshua Bardwell's property. No idea why his has no information.
I have one from December. No response yet.
My assumption is that those are not outright guaranteed denials, because maybe Bardwell's doesn't look as residential as other area. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, so my guess is those are going into a pile.
Further review
and then they're
required.
Waiting, right, and then they have to wait on FRIA PEA, which we've talked about, because PEA has to go through, and then they have to do PEA on all of those and get PEAs done for anything that actually needs to go through the next part of the process. And there's a ton of steps in here to catch, like things they don't actually want, like those personal sites. So I expect on further review we'll get a bunch more denied, but they're making it past that initial thing, and they're just going to hang out for a long time, I assume, until they get to that.
Right, and it's that programmatic environmental assessment that really worries me, because the FAA could say, oh, well, we've kicked off an environmental impact study for your property there, but we're denying your FRIA status, and that would be the worst of all worlds.
Yeah.
And Cheeto's asking if FTCA has received any denials. I don't think we've heard of any yet, have we? Or have you,
I
Dave?
think
Yeah,
they did.
They have.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have. Yeah, and I'm chatting with them tomorrow, so I'm not at liberty to go into any detail without their okay. But yes, they have received denials.
Good. Well, then I'm not the
Yeah.
only one. I've got company.
That's right. It's nothing personal. It's just
They're
just business.
Just to be clear, DFW FPV says any approvals. It's not possible currently for them to approve any FRIAs because the FRIA programmatic environmental assessment process has not gone through review, has not been completed, and then has not been applied to all these FRIA locations. And that PEA has to happen before they can approve any FRIAs. So whether or not they were ready to approve any, we don't even know that's the case. Maybe they aren't. But if they were, they would have to wait anyway for the PEA. So that's a good excuse, you know.
Right. Yeah. I think the dates were that the PEA FRIA had to have comments had to be in as of May 3rd, and then
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it was another 60 days for open for litigation, 30 or
I think
60.
that's
I think
yeah.
60.
Yeah, I think when we looked
And
at it, it would basically end like a month before FRIAs were required, essentially, right? It
right,
was like,
right.
yeah, somewhere around like August, I think, is where it's going to finalize, and then they'll literally have 1 month to get any FRIAs approved through the PEA. Which, yeah, I mean, of course, this isn't on time. Of course, this isn't going to go how it expected. But do we expect any delays? No, because we haven't heard anything about a delay of this process because there aren't FRIAs available. So.
Oh, and Dave,
Right.
I did get a response from Al today, which was basically what you expected. He's like, I don't have any input on that. You got to talk to John.
Right.
So, pretty much
Yeah.
what I think you predicted would happen.
Yes, and
That's
this is
you're talking about asking about the denied FRIAs, right?
Asking
Yep.
about why it was denied, how do I appeal, how do I continue the process, because their website has no ability to do anything. It's just your application was denied, and okay, now what? There was
Yeah,
no
this is
back
an
and forth, no working with the CBO, no explanations, nothing.
And this is an organizational challenge for the FAA in that they are highly siloed, and individuals rarely take the initiative to pick up a citizen's concern and get it to the right person within the FAA. You're on your own to figure that out. And that's an unfortunate way to run a somewhat large organization. So that's one of the things on our list, and we're not alone in that one. There were multiple testimonies to Congress of what could be done to improve the FAA as part of the 2023 Reauthorization Act, and reorganizing the FAA was one of the things that came up again and again, and that was broader than just the UAS or Unmanned Aircraft System Integration Office.
Dark Crow says, so the FAA is making CBO apply for FRIAs without having a FRIA approval system in place. I mean, sort
Yes.
of. I mean, that is basically the case. Yes. I mean,
Yes.
they sort of were like, hey, this is something we're required to do. We're not really ready, but here's a page to submit a bunch of info, and then we'll figure it out. And then they're slowly in the back end trying to figure it out across multiple members of a scattered team without any oversight. And they're slowly building in these other pieces. The FRIA PEA was required. They just didn't submit it until X date, and now we're X date away from it because there's so many days for review and all these things that are required. You know, it's basically like scrambling to make this happen because they're legally, you know, they're bound to do this. I think.
Well,
Sort of
I'm not sure that the FAA has any deadline to make any of this actually happen. Like, do they
well,
have
they
to
have a
approve,
theoretical deadline, I think.
do they
but I
have
don't
to
know that
approve
they-
any FRIAs before September 15th? I don't think they do. There's no
I don't know that that's
consequences
a
if
date
they
anywhere,
don't.
no. Right.
No,
No.
they've told us that they have no service level agreement, although they did anticipate that each review could take up to 4 months.
And they're
And then
basically seeing
subsequently they were
the FRIAs as doing us a favor, the way it came
Yes.
across in that
Right.
meeting.
I agree with that. Yeah, 100%.
right.
It seems to be the case.
Right. Yeah, and so the document of 89-3 that discusses the advisory circular 89-3 that discusses the FRIAs, and advisory circular 9157 or 9157C, which discusses the CVOs, document that they don't have this. This isn't ready. They've theoretically gone live, but it's not working. And that's the point that we've been on since December. So we will continue. And one of the things that's important in an escalation in a large organization is the turnaround time to an escalation. And so when you're telling someone that something is broken, they need to respond to you. And so that's part of the issue, is that each dialogue, each question can have, we've had several months without any response. And we're pretty good about being professional and following up, and hey, I know you're busy, but really would like an answer to this. So we know how to be a squeaky wheel and still be professional, but it's getting very frustrating.
If it just feels like the FAA doesn't care about oiling shopping carts. You know what I mean? Like I think that's the problem here, right? It's like we could be squeaky all day, but I'm not sure they're really concerned. They're just like,
right.
we can ignore that. That's fine. The shopping carts will make it around, and we're not going to get in trouble. I don't know. That's definitely in that analogy. I feel like where the FAA is at.
I think air mobility is that's the shiny new toy that's getting a lot of attention. That got 7 people added to the Advanced Aviation Advisory Committee, and I think that's where the focus is, and that's unfortunate because they're ignoring their largest cohort.
Can't we just say we'll put artificial intelligence in our drones if they don't start talking to us, and then that'll get their attention? Since that's the latest hot topic.
Yeah.
The ChatGPT powered FPV drone. That sounds scary.
Well, I've got a new processor set. What a Terry, that's exciting. Thank you to Madstech for mentioning that. I didn't realize that was happening.
Artery.
That's good to hear. Yeah, Artery.
Yeah, Artery Tech, the replacements for the STMs. Hopefully, they're almost a drop-in. The pins are drop-in replacement, but there's still a little bit of work on the back end. But Betaflight will support it in 4.5, so that's pretty exciting.
That's cool. And to me, the fact that they're both Atom. Am I getting that right? The underlying cores are the same. So that's very, very good from a perspective of making sure that the firmware runs. So yeah, that's exciting. At a lower price point by a lot.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see if other companies start adopting them. There's like one cheap Banggood or AliExpress flight controller that's like sort of a no-name that has it, and then there's
Beta FPV, I think.
No, I don't think they've adopted it yet. It's hold on, I have it on my thing. Neutron RC is the other company.
Okay.
So I'm hoping to see some bigger manufacturers hop on that train to get some cheaper processors for a while. Though I think we're going to run into the same problem we had before, which is that if people start shipping them before 4.5 ships with Betaflight, we're going to have the mess again where people are running custom firmwares that they have to find hexes for because it doesn't support the MCU, or they're going to have to run AT Betaflight, which is a fork of Betaflight. And yeah, I don't know. Maybe manufacturers will actually wait for that instead of trying to release stuff ahead of time like they always do.
Yeah, that's I've in enterprise systems. I've lived through hardware changes, and you try to keep the applications sane and stable, and it's not an easy thing to pull off.
Yep.
So I admire the Betaflight developers that they've committed to 4.5 to support Artery. That's a great thing.
Yeah, my understanding is like there was basically one of the developers got paid to build AT Betaflight on the side, and then they ended up merging AT Betaflight later, so that worked out pretty well. That's the nice thing about open source.
Agreed.
Well, let's see, Dave. Do we have any updates or progress on us becoming subject matter experts for the next FAA ARC? The one that we refer to as the Counter UAS ARC, but it's actually called something else.
It's called the Detection and Mitigation Aviation Rulemaking Committee. We're definitely not I'm a member on this. We have been requesting that we be involved as a member, like we were a member on the Beyond Visual Line of Sight ARC. Have been asking since about October. We must have been asking the wrong people. I spoke with one of the co-chairs, one of the Abby Smith, and her recommendation is that we just that no, doors closed, 58 organizations are established, and that we should work with members that we know and offer to be subject matter experts to them. We've done that, and in addition, AUVSI, one of the sponsoring companies for this effort, has put together a technical assistance group, and we are part of that. So it's very loose, and it's effectively no communication from the larger body. So I'm not, and this is important to me from a perspective of they are used. They have, in these conversations we've heard clueless, careless, and criminal use, and so they're this is to try to stop the use of drones where they shouldn't be, and we are very concerned that there could and would be overreach in the detection and mitigation, and this is both RF and physical counter UAS measures that we're talking about.
So
So
just to be
we will
clear,
stay as close as we can.
so let's say we're not invited at all as SMEs. We have no input the entire time. The AMA obviously, we assume, isn't going to actually do any work to fight for anything and just let everything go. So let's say a bunch of bad stuff happens in that arc. Does that go to an NPRM that we can then at least try to fight with comments?
In addition, it's a public record, and there is a very brief, I think it's a 30-day period that we can comment on the ARC report. And so
Okay.
the ARC will issue a formal report to the FAA, and even though it's a joint FAA and industry effort, and then subsequent to that, you're exactly right. The document goes to the rulemaking organization in the FAA. They are then responsible to create an notice for public rulemaking, which we would have an opportunity to comment on.
So
and we will.
Cheeto's asking, did we reach out to the AMA? So Dave, have we talked to the AMA about their involvement on this ARC and how we can possibly help?
Not yet.
But we've reached out to other companies that we've worked closely with on Beyond Visual Line of Sight ARC and other
We have,
ACT
and we've gotten
meetings.
positive. We've gotten a positive response from those two, and we're working with the AMA on a number of topics, and we'll bring this up in our next conversation with them. You can tell from my voice that I don't anticipate a lot of activity resulting from that, but we will ask.
Yeah, we do talk to the AMA, but they don't share information very freely, it seems. At least not in our experience.
Insert comment about corporate here. You know what I mean? That's where I'm. All right. Well,
I think that
what
might
else
be
we got?
it.
Other questions from the chat, from the people who've joined us? Anything random stuff, regulation related? Anything you want us to rant about?
We are working on working with the flight test company and Tritium Electronics on the flight test broadcast module, coming along nicely, and it is approved by the FAA with a declaration of compliance. And working on announcement documentation, as well as making sure that we have inventory on hand when we announce, or shortly after announcement. So that's coming up. Sure, we'll have it available before September 15th. So
Cheeto's asking how much it will cost, and that won't be announced till it's public.
That's right. Yeah, we're happy that it's with the cost point. We're very impressed with the Tritium Electronics company. They've done a great job on both the hardware and software supporting it. Small, it's single board, and it's double-sided, and the antenna are integrated, so there are no external antennas. The antenna, plural, are etched in the printed circuit board, GPS on one side and the Bluetooth on the other. So the design is clever, and it works really well. What else is cooking?
Less than a month away from Flight Fest, which you will be at with Rob and Josh.
And on Saturday, Alex as well. So yes, I've been cutting up conduit for gates and cutting up rebar for gate supports. So we are excited to be an FPV presence at Flight Fest. If you can go and if you're available to volunteer and you have skills that are a bit technical with beta flight, we could use your help. It is an invigorating event. They have sold out the camping sites. Last year was over 2,000 pilots. We expect the similar numbers or more this year. It is just a positive experience for kids, for young adults, and for older adults. And the objective is to try to get people into the air and having a good time. And so it has been traditionally mostly fixed wing RC made out of foam. So model airplanes made out of foam, flying RC, flying combat. And we've added FPV, mostly quadcopters, to the mix. And we add some gates, some racing gates just for fun, to try to keep it casual, relaxed, and answer questions and fix and troubleshoot any problems that people have over the event. It is 22 through 25 June this year. It's in Malvern, Ohio. And if you're able to volunteer to help out, there's let me know. Contact me at dmessina@fpvfc.org, and I'll get you in touch with the right person, who's Eddie Black.
X-Wing FPV is asking, how would I know if the remote ID tag was working properly if the battery is low and may die mid-flight? Well, I would assume part of that answer is that the remote ID system has to alert the operator somehow if there's a failure, whether that's through audio or visual.
That's correct, and it does not have to be a telemetry signal. And so we left it in the spec as part of the ASTM working group. We left this somewhat vague intentionally, and so a light would be sufficient to technically alert the operator that things are not working. In the flight test design, we've chosen to use both an LED because it could be buried in addition to a buzzer.
Also,
interesting question.
It'll be powered by your drone. So if your drone loses battery, then it'll lose battery, right?
Absolutely.
And then your drone's no longer flying because it's falling or hitting the ground, so it doesn't need remote ID anymore. It's no longer a drone.
So low battery is not a concern.
You've landed as soon as practicable.
Right. Meat brings up a good point that I'm sure Flight Test is very worried about. That next year, what are they going to do for Flight Fest, assuming that they don't get a FRIA approved for it? And does everybody need remote ID modules? I know the FAA's told us they're working on something for events, but obviously that doesn't exist yet. So I'm sure they're very concerned about that.
They fly regularly at Edgewater, right? So they're working to file Edgewater as a location.
Right, but Flight Fest doesn't happen at Edgewater. It happens elsewhere.
It's a really it's an important point that we've been talking about with Josh Bixler and Lee Cochner. It is not an issue this year, but it absolutely is, because the FAA, it's a temporary event, temporary location, and the FAA has said, "Oh yeah, we're working on it," and then they've backpedaled a little on that point and said, "Well, we don't really have anything in the works to support temporary events." And this, of course, was after Administrator Dixon told in a multi-GP individual, we will take care of you for races, which they have not done. So events we need to figure this out with the FAA. This is one of the things that we asked to work on together with them. And so, yeah, this is a really good question. Also, a shout out to Meet. Meet is on our Discord servers frequently, helping people out, and I appreciate the technical insight as well as the super positive attitude that he has to support the community. So thank you, Meet, for the work you do. We really appreciate it.
XJet's trying to ask a silly question about the GPS reacquisition time for flying in and out of bandos, but we could say that something like flight test module, we believe, has a very quick acquisition time of the satellites, if I remember right. Is that true?
It does. It is true. And
it'll have the legally required acquisition time, and also the GPS is not required to actually be active anyway if you're flying indoors. So there's like, you know what I mean? It's basically
no, but as soon
like,
as you fly out the window, it has. I don't know how that works.
Right? Because no, not technically.
It still has to be broadcasting remote
written.
ID.
You could take off without.
Right.
You could take you off without only remote ID broadcasting without GPS, and then fly the whole flight outdoors, and it would technically be compliant. So. Yay, vague rules.
Right. Until they're used against you.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, the one that really makes me worried is the 15-foot vertical accuracy requirement on standard remote ID for the controller, not for the aircraft. And so, of course, that's so that DHS can find out what floor you are located in a building, because we all fly from inside buildings. It's where we fly our drones, right? Tongue firmly inserted in cheek.
So do all modern cell phones have that accuracy of GPS in them?
Most do. It's because it's a WBAS, yeah.
I'm just thinking of something like the Avata with DJI.
That's why the Avata uses a cell phone, because it does have that level of vertical accuracy.
So I wonder how old of a cell phone does the Avata still work with, and does it know and refuse to function if you're using a cell phone that has a poor GPS that doesn't meet those requirements? Guess I haven't tested that.
I bet not. But I'm guessing on the testing, would be interesting. That would be, we could figure that one out. Just find an old phone and plug it in and see if it acquires satellites.
Yeah, they might get away with just saying that it requires a new enough operating system that only runs on phones that are fairly new with fairly new GPSs in them, but maybe not. Maybe they're smarter than that.
Yep. Good questions from around the electronic room. Any other questions? Okay. I have as part of FPVFC put an order in for a drone tag BS module, as we said that we will do what we can to acquire broadcast modules and review them as a team, as a core team, and offer that. And we will continue to be very transparent that we have a special relationship with Flight Test and are working on a specific broadcast module. And hopefully that level of transparency is okay with the community.
I'm just thinking of Flight Fest next year. If there is no FRIA and there are hundreds of people flying with remote ID enabled, like what would your app look like, and how would you ever track down who's flying? You could probably get potentially crash the apps or find bugs in them to see how many remote ID signals can they handle at once.
Yeah, one of the things we're thinking about on the app is being able to identify yourself and your friends. And so this would be a challenge when you have 150 to 200 aircraft
Yeah.
in the air.
And like Bruce points out, like how much 2.4 gigahertz noise is that going to cause? Is that going to cause too much
Hmm.
interference with all the radios that are going at the same time? Yeah, it could be a mess.
Yeah. Yeah. Upside is milliwatt level transmission power. So these are not high-powered, noisy transmitters.
And very
It's
brief
Bluetooth
transmissions.
5. Yep. But it's with that many aircraft. I mean, they discovered this in the early use of 2.4 gigahertz with the was it IRCA, the helicopter event. When they got up to a couple hundred, they had serious interference issues, which is pretty scary with big helicopters flying around.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it could be quite the experiment in 2024.
Yeah.
X-Wing FPV is asking if you can change your FAA ID if someone is tracking you. I think that's the whole point, is that they want people to be able to track you. So if you have a remote ID module, all the modules currently will be broadcasting basically their serial number. And so every time you fly that remote ID, it'll always be the same serial number. And that serial number you're supposed to register on the FAA's website, so the FAA knows which serial number matches with who.
Right.
Yeah, there was a provision for rotating numbers, but that only applies to standard remote ID, where you can I can't remember the term, but you can basically have a new number each time you fly. Session ID, but
Session
you can
ID.
only have that,
Right.
yeah, each time you fly. But that's only for standard. That wasn't added into the verbiage for our remote ID
Yeah.
broadcast module remote ID.
And it appears that there's no one has done anything with that. So I completely agree with Blunty. This is possible per the standard, but we're not aware of anyone exploiting that capability. So just as Dan said, it appears that everyone we are aware of is using the serial number as the identifier, and then if someone wants to find out who you are, they have to contact the FAA, and they have to be law enforcement to get an answer. Good question. Anything else? Anything else coming up, Dan?
Real quick, Seg says you can design your own module, so that's not accurate because the module has to be approved by the FAA. So you would have to still go through approval with the FAA. Just to be clear, you can't just like build a module open source and then pop it on and be legal.
Correct. And we went to a lot of pains with the flight test module to make sure that we were compliant with the spirit, much more than just the letter of the regulation. And so you need to take a look at the two ASTM standards, 3411 and 3586, and these are hundreds and hundreds of pages of regulations, or rather specifications, excuse me, as well as the remote ID rule. And so this is a non-trivial development effort, and then you have to go through bench testing and field testing as well.
Yeah, you can obviously create your own module. So I just want to be clear. You could absolutely create your own module, but it'd be cost prohibitive and annoying as hell for most people to do. And you doing it on your own would only open you to litigation by the FAA because you have lied directly to the FAA in a federal declaration of compliance because now you can tamper your own module. I just want to be clear. Like, there's some stream in chat here that's confused, I think. Because like you can't just make your own module that's totally incompliant, get it approved by DOC because they don't care, and then just fly with it however you want. That's going to bite you in the ass. I can almost guarantee you that. And I think we're going to see that at some point in maybe 2, 4, 6, 8 years. But I think we'll eventually see that on DOCs that are invalid when people find out that they're invalid, and then they start clamping down on this information. Because at some point somebody's going to care about remote ID probably, and when somebody cares about remote ID, and stuff's going to get clamped down. And when stuff gets clamped down, the people who are violating are going to get in trouble, probably. I mean, I can't say for sure, but I'm just saying I don't think that's the smart way to go.
When folks are going to get really interested in remote ID is when unmanned traffic management becomes a thing, and that's all about air mobility. So that's spinning up right now in the United States, and it'll happen elsewhere in the world first. But that's a market need or perceived market need that's going to drive remote ID enforcement, in my humble opinion.
So Ed over on YouTube's asked, talking about remote ID modules, and that he would like to have one that's self-contained, can be moved from one aircraft to another, and just needs a battery plug like an AIO camera would have. And pretty sure that that's pretty close to what the flight test one is doing. You may have to solder on your own like connector so that it works with the battery types that you want or connector types that you want, but it would be possible to have almost any kind of a power source and battery connector, and then you can move that between your aircraft, right?
Yeah.
Right on the money.
Also remember when you're registering. My understanding is how this process will work is when you're registering a home-built UAS, so a UAS that you built on the FAA website, you're going to list your drones and the serial numbers for them, right? But the serial number for your drone, the way it works now, is you enter the serial number of the remote ID module. The rest of our information is home built and generic for each drone. So my understanding and my impression is that you can just file one drone, home built UAS, home built for everything else, and then the serial of the remote ID module, and that technically makes all the drones legal under that one module without having to go edit the FAA website every single time you move that module to another drone.
And am I remembering this right? If you're doing a Part 107 flight, you have to register every drone, and you have to have a separate module for every drone. If
Yes, 107.
you're
yes.
doing
Yeah.
it that way.
Yeah, and I subscribe to what Bunty described for recreational. Sign it up once, pass it around, because it's the module that's being, and the module serial is matched to your personal FAA registration. So you as a recreational 44809 operator. So the FAA is getting what they want from their registration, and we're getting what we want, the ability to move that module from aircraft to aircraft. And
Yeah.
that stands as only for recreational.
Yeah,
Part
and Meat,
107 has to be a one-to-one.
and Meat's saying that he didn't think broadcast modules were available for Part 107, but it's one of those weird cases where if you have a drone built before, manufactured before that deadline, whatever that was last year, then you have to have
September
a module on it
16,
to fly it.
2022.
Uh,
Right.
but you can't manufacture a new one that uses a module anymore. It's just
Right.
to grandfather in old stuff so you can fly it again. It has to have a module or firmware that creates remote ID.
Right. Yeah. Very important point. And so if you have you build a commercial intended Part 107 drone today, and you want to put a broadcast module on it, that's technically that's not enough. That's supposed to have standard remote ID. So it has to have the location of the ground control station or the transmitter noted dynamically or measured dynamically once a second, and that has to be part of the message element that is transmitted by the aircraft. And there has to be on post or power up, if the broadcast if the RID subsystem is not functioning, it has to prevent the aircraft from taking off. Those are the two larger differences between standard remote ID and a broadcast module.
Yeah, and then there's also lots of other silly requirements, manufacturing requirements about the FAA inspecting your manufacturing plant and all that other stuff.
Right. Subpart F, subpart 21.
I think the thing that most people should take into account, and obviously each person needs to make their own decisions based on this, but I expect that you're going to be in the bracket of we don't care or we're going to be very nice to you for a long time if you're flying a commercial drone with a broadcast module and still broadcasting remote ID of some sort. I highly doubt that you will immediately receive a fine or penalty for doing a broadcast module on a commercial drone. I think worst case, you'll get a, hey, we don't think this is okay. You should not do this anymore. Please cease operations. I can't guarantee you that. Each person needs to make their own decision. But I really doubt that you're going to get slapped down on for running some kind of remote ID and attempting to meet requirements with your home-built drone. That's what I would say.
Yep. I think that's a very sensible approach. I agree with you, Plenty.
So
Yeah, and we
Ed,
don't know what the FAA response is going to be, but that's you are attempting to comply.
Ed's asking a question over
Yes.
on YouTube. How come manufacturers like Hobby Zone, Horizon Hobby, whomever, for example, is not providing remote ID in their aircraft kits like RTF when it is sold? I thought all manufacturers had to comply before they sell.
These are different understandings of what that means. So people are taking different interpretations of the rule, or I believe a few are just not caring. But most of the companies, I believe, are saying like, if we don't sell you a battery with your drone or with your plane, that means you can't fly it. So that means it's not a complete kit. So we don't need to sell your standard remote ID. And that's sort of where, I think Rotor Riot took the term of Rotor Riot is saying in a blurb at the bottom that everything is for personal use, indoor use only, something like that, right? Where they're considering that you cannot use this outdoors in a space where you need remote ID, and we're going to sell it to you like that. And that's going to hopefully, forgo them of the issues. So right now, as far as we know, none of these stores have been talked to or discussed, you know, from the FAA about this. So I assume everybody's just going to keep writing it out and making their own decisions about it until we start to see letters cease and desist, if that happens, right, to these different places. And
Yeah.
that's where we'll see actual changes, I think.
And someone like Horizon Hobby could probably go a couple of years and say that these aircraft were manufactured in 2022. And as long as it's like a model they had back then, they may have built a whole bunch of them, and they take a couple of years to sell their inventory.
Yeah, I believe the term is complete kit in the rules. That may be wrong, but I think that the way the term works is
Yeah,
complete
and it
kit.
changed a bit between the NPRM and the final rule. The final rule was more vague.
Yeah,
And
happily,
Yes.
because the NPRM had a percentage of kit from a manufacturer, which was that was there was no definition of how do you calculate a percentage? Is it cost? Is it weight? I mean, it was bad. So happily they got rid of that.
yeah, but so like if they are truly trying to sell it ready to fly, like that would have to have standard remote ID if it was manufactured after September 15th, 2022.
Right. Great questions. Anything else popping up, Dan?
Let's see.
Mupshot asked about Express LRS broadcast the GPS location, but has no broadcast of its launch. I'm hoping that future firmware might broadcast over Wi-Fi, making it resemble what RID could be. Yeah, the issue is still that they're going to need a declaration of compliance for any hardware. So if you want to be technically legal with that hardware, you would have to get individual hardware DOC'd and then purchase that hardware from a vendor that's got that approved DOC. So
And is ELRS open source?
it is, yes. Yes, you would need
So
some closed
being
source blob, right,
right,
to not
you
be
got it.
tampered.
You
Yeah.
got it. And so it's another vague term that we sweated with the FAA because coders don't like it, and I support their frustration. But there's tamper resistance. It was the desire, and the view is that if it's all open source, that's not sufficient. So just dropping this technical capability into an open source um, uh, code batch is the view is that that's absolutely not going to fly, if you'll forgive the pun. Just as Blunty was pointing out, there are a number of flight controllers that have areas either that are separate processors that are designed to run closed source, and that would be a good way to have that happen on a flight controller. But overall, with open source, end to end, it's probably not gonna work as an approval to get a declaration of compliance.
Right.
Yeah, and we've been through this, and we'll probably have further discussions on this point. There are good ways to execute standard remote ID with an open source flight controller or an open source command and control um, protocol like ELRS. I mean, it's just a matter of, where do you want this function to emit from, and where do you want to run it, and what's a sensible approach to making it tamper resistant, and then keeping it synchronized with the rest of the code. That's always, when you have multiple diverse functions, that's always a software configuration management challenge.
XJet says tamper resistant simply means a sticker to be attached that says "Do not tamper." That's funny. I did cannabis. For people who don't know, I have a history in cannabis, and we literally, I mean, it was crazy. They spent millions of dollars getting bags approved that were actually tamper resistant enough to be okay. And eventually the test ended up being, I think it was another ASTM group, they would put a child in a room who was 6 years old. They would pick randomly select children who were 6 years old. They would sit them at a table with a bag in front of them, and they would try to get them to open it. And there was a piece of candy inside for 10 minutes. And if they couldn't open it in 10 minutes, then it was considered tamper resistant if like a certain percentage of them couldn't get it open. So
I love it.
just for some
Now,
perspective.
yeah, we took this, as I said, there were coders as well as hardware developers in the ASTM group, and we spent hours and hours and hours on this topic. And we knew we could be very precise on the language. There are industry accepted terms here, but that would have driven the cost much higher, and it would have increased the weight, which I was freaking out about, because they're like, great, we'll just fill these things with resin and we'll be closed source, and we'll be all set. And I'm like, no, we're not, these things can't be multiple ounces. So I'm happy where we landed. Yes, it's vague. The result is that we'll have broadcast modules that are fractions of an ounce.
Dak asked for any updates on 1 kilogram. We won't see those probably for a few months, I expect. Whenever we see the FAA Reauthorization Act get pushed through, we'll find out basically what ends up in there. Is sort of where we're at with that process, unfortunately. I'd love to have some sort of more info, but that's not really the way the process works. When you submit these sort of things, you don't get communication back and forth most of the time. So yeah, we're sort of a wait and see, and hope they took all the calls and information and everything to heart. And hopefully, yeah, we'll get support from other groups like the AMA at some point when they do feel like it's time to do one of those letter writing campaigns.
And what we're watching for is the issuance of the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2023. And so when that bill hits the streets, then that's a public, that'll be on the Federal Register, that will be available to us to read, and then it's then the 11th hour, because
right, and you're talking about when it's public, but before it's voted on, right?
Exactly right. And in as much as this is a bicameral and bipartisan bill, we'll see 2 bills, one from the Senate and one from the House, and then they have to go to conference. So there will be some amount of time that this is supposed to be resolved. We recall that the chair of the House Aviation Subcommittee, his desire was to have the House bill voted and approved in June. Given the gymnastics that we're observing with the debt ceiling, I think that might be optimistic. How's that for euphemisms?
Mupshot says, I understand the tamper resistance. My concern is if LEO leaves me alone, if I have my registration and broadcasting my GPS position, I'd like to comply with the spirit of the law, but I know it's the letter that matters. So, like, let's say, for instance, you built your own remote ID broadcast just because you want it to look compliant, and you broadcast whatever serial. So law enforcement doesn't have the ability to look up on the spot your serial information. But let's say you were approached by law enforcement, they took your information and serial and then did a lookup with the FAA and it wasn't valid. That's where I think you would then run into an issue, I would assume. So I think it's probably better in that case to not broadcast than just to broadcast a fake serial and attempt to look valid. But I mean, that's going to be on each person's decision. I would expect that it's better not to try to spoof information because it does get correlated to a database on the back end at some point.
Yeah, and then you're trying to portray yourself as a manufacturer in that case, and that's not something we would ever recommend.
Right.
Yeah, the notion of I put a good broadcast module on my older Part 107 device, that you're trying to do the right thing, and that's where we're headed as well.
I totally understand the idea of like, hey, let me broadcast my GPS location so people can know where my drone is, and that feels more compliant than not doing it. But unfortunately, part of that is the RID element is the serial number. And so if you're broadcasting a serial number that's not registered somewhere, then that becomes invalid. Here's the question,
Right.
Dave. I've never thought about this. What if you made up a serial? Where do the serial numbers get referenced at? I don't actually know
There's
this
a
answer. If
specific
you
They
format.
have to be compliant with ANSI 6331.
so let's
So
say you made up something
the
that was close, and then you went and typed it in to the FAA website. Does that then get logged into their database anyway, and then would be lookupable, or is it back through the manufacturer where the number gets into their database?
part of the declaration of compliance is the serial number ranges in the first four
Okay.
digits of your serial number relate to you as a manufacturer.
But you could
Okay,
certainly
great.
pick
So, yeah,
a
they're-
serial number that matches some existing one, or pick one that's, was the very first or last in the range or something.
In the middle of a DJI Avata. Yeah, you could do that. Not something we recommend.
Yeah, just pontificating. So
Yep, good question. Yeah.
Or just fly a drone that looks like it's 249 grams when it's out flying.
yes,
Very light.
also
Very
that.
light. Very thin carbon.
Or
Right.
you bring
Well,
that
we're-
scale with you that everything weighs 249 grams when you put it on it. And
Got my thumb on the scale. Very little battery. Very small.
and I shouldn't say weight, I should say mass, because
Mass.
if it weighs, because it's got helium, its weight could be less than a gram technically.
Right.
All right. Well, it's 9:03. I think we did pretty good. Got a bunch
I
of
think
questions.
so.
We
answered.
ranted on
Yeah.
remote ID for long enough, I'd say.
Yeah, I really appreciate the questions, everyone. Thank you. I did hear from Josh. He forgot about us. He apologizes, and so we hope to have Josh back in 2 weeks. And thank you, everyone,
Yeah.
for attending. And the questions were great, and we really appreciate those because it gives us a sense of where's the tension, where's the frustration.
100%.
Anything else, gentlemen?
Nope, sounds
think that's
good. We
gonna
hope
do
to
it.
see you guys all back in 2 weeks.
Absolutely.
Thank you both.
Later,
Take
everybody.
care, gentlemen.